So some of these corporations were set up under Calvinistic Presbyterian dominion. Some of them were set up under... So initially, you didn't have... You know, you don't like it, go settle somewhere else. It's like you set your own club and you create your own rules. Eventually, when you created constitutions and you break away from England, you have a state. Then, wow, let's see. State religion. A state-enforced religion impinges upon the notion of religious freedom, which is one of the things that we came to America to get away from. And this is Roger Williams, who was the founder of the colony in Rhode Island, is the father of the Baptist movement in America. He was the first one in America that came up with the phrase relating to the separation of church and state. And it basically, essentially, is saying we don't want a state-dominated religion like we had in Europe. And so today, you can't have religion in the public school. That's not what he meant. And that's not what this phrase means. It is a limitation on the state. And a lot of the functions of society were pretty much run by the church. So I just wanted the whole notion that we should separate church and state came from these separatists because of their notion of religious liberty. Now this notion that came about through the Judeo-Christian understanding of free will, and the state is an institution based upon force, and that's why they're separate. The whole notion came about through this understanding is used to exclude the Judeo-Christian worldview from the public square. It's kind of ironic. So now I mentioned the Quakers. They took this doctrine of the inner light to its fullest extreme. We don't need church. We don't need state. We can live totally through the inner light and brotherly love. As a matter of fact, I mentioned that last time. As a matter of fact, the city of Philadelphia means brotherly love. And they set the city of Philadelphia for a period of time. They had no government whatsoever. Complete laissez-faire. French, leave us alone. There was an article on the internet. It's called A Holy Experiment in Laissez-Faire by Benjamin Hart. And he was talking about the impact that this had. Now, like I mentioned last time, there were certain aspects of this experiment that didn't work, particularly defense of the frontier against the Indians. And we're going to talk about that in a future presentation. But where it did work, in the areas where it did work, it worked quite well. And it had a big impact on a lot of the other, some of the later thinkers that we refer to as Enlightenment thinkers. This is where we got our idea from. Pennsylvania foreshadowed the ideas of the American Revolution. It was the first large state to permit citizens of various nationalities and religious faiths to enjoy equal protection under the law. The success of Penn's colony greatly interested the classical liberal philosophers of the 18th and 19th centuries. Mill, Hume, Adam Smith, Madison, Hamilton, Jefferson were all influenced by that. It had proved under real-life conditions that a society could go a long way towards total laissez-faire before the conditions began to decay into anarchy. Philadelphia, with virtually no government, came very close to achieving its ideal of a city of brotherly love. It was a vision of America to be, and would provide a fitting location for the signing of the U.S. Constitution in the fall of 1787. So, again, you're going to hear that our experiment in liberty, had to wait until the Enlightenment to force the ideas of religious liberty on backwards, superstitious group of but this is, historically, that's not accurate. The views and ideas had existed for a long time before that. Now, Jonathan Edwards, he took some of these views himself, and he believed that human beings were created, not just human beings, the whole universe was created in such a way to strive after excellence. And that excellence can be achieved by realizing this dominion of God in our lives. And that through this dominion of God's dominion, and through that God exercised his dominion through what he calls sovereign beauty. That there was an attraction, that God, moral, spiritual, intellectual excellence, the beauty of God's vision, the beauty of God's creation, the beauty of God's moral principles was an attraction. So human beings are attracted to this moral sovereignty, like a moth to a flame. And so this idea of attraction as a way of influencing our decisions. We're free insofar as we make a decision, but our decisions are conditioned by our passions. And he says that true religion consists of holy affections. On the same token, as St. Paul was saying in Romans, that because people worship the creation rather than the Creator, we became slaves to our passions. So whether we're going to follow God or whether we're going to become slaves is going to depend upon the way our passions are oriented. And so realizing our potential as images, people created in the image of God, and reflecting God's glory by bringing about that excellence, to a large extent, is going to be determined by how our passions are aimed. And the passions, human life and human striving and human behavior started with, we're motivated by passion. So it started with passions, and then it leads into reason. It starts with passion, then you have reason, and you have intellect, which, intellect, emotion, and will. And eventually you have will, which determines our behavior. So there was a complete understanding of intellect, emotion, and will all coming together to follow this path of excellence, which in the realization of the image of God within us. Now following this path is going to be a rough ordeal, because if we're going to be God's emissary for presenting the ideas of truth, love, and beauty, and justice, and all these things in a world where these things are not taken very seriously, we're going to have a rough road to hoe. And so they realize that if you're going to be God's champion, you're going to run into ordeals, rough ordeals. And there was something that the Puritans referred to as purification by ordeal. And when they first came to America, they were brought into a situation where they were surrounded by a hostile wilderness, and many times some of the Indians were friendly and some of them were not. Many times their villages were wiped out, their families killed or taken captive, and the women were taken captive. And you had this literary genre called captivity narratives, where people were taken captive, and usually as a woman, after the family was killed. And they saw this as a potential test to purification, to where an opportunity to strengthen their character. And so they wrote about it, and this is terrible. The things that they suffered and endured was incredible, but they wrote about it as a potential purification of their character, so they could give them the opportunity to experience the manifestation of God's ideal. Now, so that's, in a nutshell, I just want to wrap it up quickly. In a nutshell, what we're talking about is that the individual character as a manifestation of God's ideal liberty is necessary to develop that character. And the development of that character, of the strong individuals to become champion of God's ideal, is essential for the development of community. So this idea of a dichotomy between individual liberty and community is a false dichotomy.